mindful. And at times I could get into it, but I noticed, and it wasn't news, that I have a certain history and background, as do many of us, as a doer, right? It's very, very much in the society. Anyone think of yourself as a doer, get things done, right? And so I found even in meditation, I was used to, okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to try to do it well, right? And going back probably towards early childhood where I get certain strokes for doing things well, right? We all have that, we want that, we get used to the strokes. And so, in other words, and I'll come back to this, there's a lot of conditioning to be a doer. And of course, a lot of good things come of that. I'm going to be pointing to the balance of doing and not doing and point to the way that for, I would say for myself, for many of us, the conditioning around doing sometimes makes not doing harder, and it can set up some limitations. And so what I want to do is to talk about and explore this theme in 4 different ways. One way is to talk about the value of doing in meditation. And then, and also to some extent, daily life. And then the importance of not doing in meditation and daily life. And a lot of where I'll go with that are making fairly simple points that came out in the meditation, that there's ultimately a balance of what we might call doing and not doing, or active and receptive. So that'll be the first 2 parts. And then I'll talk some about working with conditioning of being a doer and ways that we can inquire into the doer and how it manifests in a way which is not so helpful at times. Mostly because it becomes habitual and habitual and just insistent. I will be the doer here, folks. We got a meeting, I'm taking care of it, right? Or something like that. And then in the last part, I'm going to, in part, refer to quite a few spiritual traditions, including Buddhist practice, and talk about a deeper vision that we find, I think, in many traditions of having one's doing come out of a deeper not doing. And I'll refer briefly to Jewish and Christian traditions, and especially to Taoist and Buddhist traditions. And many of you know Taoist traditions, right at the center is a concept, Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or not doing. We find it with Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, and I'll come back to that. I think it's something really to explore in both meditation and daily life. So first, the importance of doing in meditation. And this would be connected with themes which probably Rania has explored in terms of skillful effort. What is skillful effort? Right effort is one of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, being skillful in effort. And when you read the Buddha, you often find him in, very much being the coach who's saying, keep up your effort, keep on examining, keep on practicing. It's said that his last words were, all things are impermanent. Basically, keep on practicing with care. Different translations, one translation is work out your salvation with diligence, right? I don't know what kind of translation that was. I don't know if the Buddha actually used a word which could easily be translated as salvation, which sounds a bit Christian. But that being said, he often insisted on the sense of really keeping your effort up, right? And continually developing skillful qualities, continually looking for when unskillful qualities are there. The teachings of wise effort are basically, I think, some of you remember there are 4 things you do with wise effort with the Buddha. The first is try to stay out of trouble. Stay out of difficult or bad states. Stay out of trouble. Second is know what to do if you get in trouble. Know what to do if unskillful states are there. Thirdly, develop good qualities, good habits. Keep on developing them, whatever, mindfulness, all the paramis that Rhonda's explored, patience, generosity, equanimity. Keep on developing those. And then keep them going. That's what wise effort is in the teaching of the Buddha, expressed in a simple way. And so, what does wise effort mean for us? It means in daily life, it might mean keep on with your daily practice, right? Go on retreats periodically. And it also, there's also a quality of doing that's obviously central to our work, parenting, being a good citizen, being an activist, whatever. All of these involve doing. And I don't think I need to say much more to say that various kinds of doing are crucial in our everyday lives and in meditation. So that in some ways is a very obvious point. And again, teachings of the Buddha emphasize skillful effort, keep on with your doing. This is not exact translation, but don't be a slacker. That's paraphrase of the Buddha. Okay. And second really crucial area is that not so obviously not doing is also really crucial in meditation and in daily life. Again, the doing is more obviously valuable. But as I suggested in the brief guidance for our meditation, there's a very important role for being receptive in meditation. We can have the active part in mindfulness. The way many of us do it might be naming what's happening, identifying what's happening. There's that, keeping on coming back to the breath, returning, and so forth. Sometimes doing inquiry, investigation. My mind's going all around a story. What's going on in my body? What's there in the emotions? That's all active, really, really valuable. But there's not so obviously also a place for being receptive. Maybe it's clear to many of us. One part is simply, as I suggested in the meditation, being able just to hang out with a particular experience. My shoulder hurts. Can I just be receptive to the unpleasant sensations without making a big issue, assuming that it's pretty mild or moderate, it's not causing damage and so forth? Or can I be with anger or joy and just say, okay, this is happening. What's it like? Right? Being receptive in that way. My colleague Gil Fronsdal, probably some of you have heard his talks. He once had a very nice way of talking about mindfulness in general, and he said that mindfulness is somewhat like canoeing. There's paddling, the active dimension, but if you only paddle, it's limited. You have to sometimes just stop paddling, float, and enjoy. And so we could say that mindfulness is like that. There's paddling, the active dimension, and there's also floating, the receptive dimension of mindfulness, just letting experience come to us and be with it. And sometimes there can be an active dimension of returning if our mind wanders. So, and then there's also that teaching that I gave from the Buddha, that the mind in meditation is very much like a lute that's neither too tight nor too loose. And he gave that teaching at different times. And how many have heard that teaching or that analogy? Yeah, it's pretty common. And so it's a really good instruction to do what we did at the beginning. If you know that your tendency is to be too tight, set the intention to relax some. Can I really keep with my awareness, but can I let it be lighter or more receptive? And again, if we're overly loose, can I put out a little more effort? And it's interesting. If we are doers, we may still be involved with doing even when we think we're not doing. We're invited to let go, and we really try really hard to let go, which is interesting. And I once had a retreat with a teacher where he invited me, because he didn't tell me explicitly, maybe he sensed that I had some excessive doing in my approach to meditation. And he said, okay, I want you for these 10 days to do nothing. Don't meditate, but be aware. Those were his instructions. And I really got into it. I really was enjoying just being aware, not deliberately meditating, being present. And then I noticed myself saying at one point, I'm doing non-doing really well. My doer was taking credit for the non-doing. A third area that is really related to actually the story I just told is that it can be really, really interesting to investigate the doer. And for many of us, and I think it's there a lot in the culture, that we may commonly, I don't know if I'll ask for a show of hands, but we may go, as it were, we may go more on the side of the doer. And so there are a lot of interesting ways to investigate the doer. And again, a lot of it is very cultural, very social conditioning, busyness, right? Busyness is very, very, anyone find yourself quite busy? Certain number of the people I work with are retired, and they say, I don't know why I'm so busy. It's habit, right? It can be really habit. And one Tibetan teacher I heard said of Westerners generally, your busyness is your laziness. I think he was referring to practice, but we could generalize that. Does that resonate? So what was he meaning by that? Something like your busyness keeps you away from really what's important. You get caught up in it and maybe you don't practice so much. You get really busy, it's not so necessary, and it has its drawbacks. I once was talking about busyness, and there was a woman who was from Japan who came up to me afterwards and she showed me the characters for busyness in Japanese. The characters for busyness in Japanese translate as the heart dies. Wow, that's pretty intense, right? Wow, who would have thought? And I've never been to Japan. I understand they're pretty busy, and how can they look that character in the face? I don't know. That's pretty striking, isn't it? The heart dies. Another translation, the soul dies from the busyness. So a lot of it is social, and cultural. And, I've spent some time with indigenous peoples. I have had friends who've invited me into their communities, particularly far northern California and also in British Columbia. And I remember spending about a week in British Columbia. I was invited to a potlatch, which is a gift-giving ceremony. And I think they had a very different relationship to busyness. And you can sense also that busyness is also connected with the concept of time, right? I'm not going to go so much into our notion of time, but I think it's very related. And at this potlatch, there was no official starting time. That's interesting, isn't it? And people sort of wandered in, typically 2 or 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And it didn't have an official finishing time. It kind of just went on. And it was different. It was different, and there was something that was I found beautiful about it. I'm not wanting to say everything there is beautiful and we got problems and so forth, but there was some learning that I had just from a different way of doing it, so to speak. In many Buddhist traditions, as you get deeper, there's a sense that you don't need to do as much. As we get into the depths of our being, there's an understanding that what we most need to do is just let our deeper wisdom and love be present, and that we don't have to manufacture it. This is what we teach when we teach loving kindness or metta. It's more like the metaphor of the metta is the sun and it gets covered over by the clouds. And so ultimately, we let our deeper being more just come out by removing what covers it. That's really a deep way to understand our practice, right? We don't manufacture love, we don't manufacture wisdom. We find ways of letting go or working through what gets in the way. So that's a lot of our practice, isn't it? Seeing what gets in the way of awareness, of love and kindness, compassion, of wisdom. And then what that means is at the depths of practice, there's a non-doing. It's interesting, right? Does that make some sense as we get there? And so we can look into the doer in various ways. Take a period of time in which you don't have to, quote unquote, do anything. See if you get nervous. See if you start doing things. Have some time in which nothing's scheduled. Watch what you do or don't do, right? Do we, I've spoken with a number of people who go on vacation and start getting anxious. And almost like have to manufacture a schedule or things to do. And not doing anything is sometimes anxiety provoking. How many have experienced something like that? Maybe on vacation or on a time when nothing's scheduled. It's interesting, isn't it? So you can look at that. Watch the doing mind. Watch your sense of almost like goal orientation. Like, I talked to one person and she said, she's a teacher and she gets really, really busy trying to do everything as quickly as she can so she can get to a point where she can relax. But when she actually gets there, she's exhausted. right? And there's some parallels with that on almost how people think of retirement, right? We work really, really hard to retire. And then when one retires, one forgets what one wanted to do. There's some interesting dynamics here. One does. And then when you get there, you may forget what's most important. So it's really to do the inquire. Look at the tendency to try to fix things. Again, understanding that there's virtue there and so forth. So there's that very interesting way that we can actually inquire into our own minds when the doer gets real active, right? See what it's about, notice it. I think particularly when it's kind of clearly not needed. I think like vacations, time off, and so forth. And the last area I want to talk about is something that comes out of multiple traditions, both in meditation and daily life. And this is the sense that there's a more profound way of doing, which comes out of a deeper non-doing. And you can have a sense of what that means from what I just said earlier, that if our basic nature is love, wisdom, compassion, awareness, and that's actually not manufactured, but sort of just there, and it's more a matter of touching into it or of getting to our basic nature, which is covered over by conditioning, then a simple way to talk about this teaching is to say when we get to our deeper nature, it itself just naturally expresses it. When you're in, like, think of yourself when you're really in a frame of love. Do you have to, do you give up the love when you want to do something? Or when you act out of love, is sometimes the doing much simpler? We're acting out of love and wisdom. I don't know if I said that as clearly as I wanted to, but did that convey something there? I mean, I'll come back and say it in a little different way. So in different traditions, there is this sense that if you can touch your depth, there's a kind of doing which comes out of a deeper non-doing. That's a better way to say it. There's a kind of doing. So you're doing things, you're taking a walk, you're teaching, you're, I don't know, repairing a car, whatever, but can it come out of a deeper place? That's a simple way to talk about it. So that actually the doing is a kind of non-doing. It could be raising children, giving a talk, teaching, many things. And I thought of how in many religious or spiritual traditions, there is a sense of the importance of not doing, and how one, in some traditions, when one is truly not doing, one gets filled by the Spirit, so to speak, to use one kind of language. From the Hebrew Bible, from the Psalms, be still and know that I am God. Stillness required, a kind of non-doing. From the Christian Bible, Jesus often said something like this, I can of mine own self do nothing. I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father, which hath sent me. So a sense that he empties himself, or he's empty and he's filled with something deeper. And that is what leads to action. From John, if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. And then there's the Taoist tradition where this is even more explicit. The notion of Wu Wei, of what's translated as non-action or non-exertion. And this was actually even a political theory with Lao Tzu, going back over 2,000 years, Lao Tzu thought that the true ruler is one who actually does nothing, but lets sort of the people work things out. It's interesting. From Lao Tzu, by continual losing, one reaches doing nothing. By doing nothing, everything is done. Another, this is from the Tao Te Ching, no action is undertaken, and yet nothing is left undone. And this is from, I brought actually a book on my travels, The Way of Chuang Tzu, translated by Thomas Merton, interestingly. And this is one passage. The non-action of the wise person is not inaction. It is not studied. It is not shaken by anything. The heart of the wise person is tranquil. It is the mirror of heaven and earth, the glass of everything. Emptiness, stillness, tranquility, tastelessness, silence, non-action. This is the level of heaven and earth. This is the perfect Tao. Wise ones find here their resting places. I could read some other passages, but the book is full of those kind of stories. One story I thought of reading, but I think I want to get to a discussion soon, was about a wood carver who said, when I'm actually carving something, I let myself be totally empty. He said, to carve something really beautiful, I fast, I empty myself, I remove myself from stimuli, and then I commune with the piece of wood. And I am empty. In a sense, I do nothing. The spirit of the wood speaks to me, and I follow its guide, and I carve something. It sounds like what some artists might say, right? Or musicians, right? I think, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think of, let's see, I was thinking of John Coltrane. Let me see if I can find this quote. He said something like, all a musician can do is to get closer to the sources of nature and so feel that one is in communion with the natural laws, right? And does that make sense of what you know? How many of us are artists or musicians? Yeah. So does that make some sense maybe of what you know of art or music? You kind of empty yourself, you let your doing come out of that. I talked to my brother, who is a professional musician, jazz and blues musician, and he said that there is typically some form or structure, but there's also a profound sense of flow, and that most of it is just intuitively following the flow. And, sometimes you have to make decisions, but they're not so frequent. You have to make decisions. Should I return to this rhythm or not? But so much of it is just being present with the flow and, in a sense, not doing anything. And so that's something that we find in a number of Buddhist traditions. The place where I find it clearest is in some of the Tibetan traditions. So let me read a few things. This is from one of the great Tibetan teachers named Longchenpa from the 14th century. And he's talking about deep awareness. Given awareness, which is not cultivated in meditation. We don't create awareness, right? It's there. If you meditate again and again, you will see that there is nothing to cultivate in meditation. And he's talking about deeper levels of meditation. Nothing to cultivate in meditation. This is the meditation of omnipresent awareness. And in that tradition, sometimes more advanced meditation is called non-meditation. And sometimes I use a phrase and it's called destroy meditation. It's kind of funny. Here's another one. Freedom is not due to effort. Rather, one abides timelessly in freedom. So there is a way that as one goes deeper in meditation, you can explore, as I was doing in my retreat, just that kind of opening really to one's being. Now, it requires that one's mind is fairly quiet. Because if we open and the mind's just in its condition mode, it won't quite do it. But there's a sense that when we get a little bit deeper, sometimes those instructions on not doing can be powerful. And I wanted to go back to also to daily life. I found some research. Actually, I knew of some research by people, and one was at Berkeley, and Hubert and Stuart Dreyfus. They did research on what we might call experts in a number of different fields, such as being a musician, such as being a teacher, maybe an engineer, maybe a craftsperson, auto mechanic, whatever. And what they found is that there are really 5 stages of being an expert. First you have to really study it, develop your proficiency, and so forth. You have to remember the guidance. When you get to the expert level, it's way, way more intuitive, and there's not kind of a deliberate doing. You're not saying, I will do this. It's kind of like, think of a musician just playing, and it has a lot of those qualities of not doing. And there's something like that in the concept of flow. People know the concept of flow from that named by the Hungarian psychologist with a difficult to pronounce name, which I've talked about him enough, so I know how to pronounce it now. Csikszentmihalyi. And he said that when you're in flow, you're sort of doing things, but it's coming out of a deeper place. It's a kind of doing coming out of a more profound non-doing. Like when you're really, in sports, they would call this playing in the zone, right? Where you're just, something is there. And I have a friend named Andrew Cooper who wrote a whole book called Playing in the Zone about sports. And he collected these amazing stories about athletes who, being in the zone, marathoners. Is anyone here a fan of the NBA? I am. Okay. Some of you remember, this was a while ago. Anyone followed the career of Michael Jordan? North Carolina. And Michael Jordan, in one of the finals, in the first half, he shot 7 3-pointers in a row. And he was in the zone. He was doing, but not consciously doing. He was in an intuitive place. And then he walks by the scorer's table and he goes like this. Anyone seen that image? Right? He goes like this. What's it mean? He means basically, it's not me, right? Now, however, when he did that, he was becoming self-conscious. He was out of the zone. He missed his next shot. Right? And so there are stories like that in sports, in music. And I think we experience this a fair amount when we're doing things that we're really comfortable with. How many of you can think of a time when you were sort of in the zone? The characteristic is, I'll read it, fully immersed, a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, enjoyment, full use of your capabilities, whatever you're doing. How many can identify activities in which that's the case, right? I would say that that's an example of a kind of a doing coming out of a not doing, because it's like just flowing out of your being, whatever it is. And probably music, art, sports can be some of the best examples, but it could be cooking. It could be being with a child. It could be just being with a tree, something like that. So I think I'm can really finish up from that, and yeah, and to say that I think for me this is a powerful inquiry, to look at it in all the different levels. So I explored it in terms of the importance of doing in meditation in more ordinary ways, right? Come back to the object, the breath, use labeling, know what's happening, skillful effort in all sorts of ways, then the importance of not doing as well. And I think for many of us who tend to be more doers, for whom some kinds of not doing are harder, than inquiring, looking at the doer. What is this, right? Again, can notice that at certain times when maybe there's anxiety that my doer isn't happening or whatever, or, there's too much open time and space, right? Could be something like that. And then lastly, I think the deeper vision is the one that I just gave through the different traditions, something in both meditation, in daily life, in ordinary action. It's basically saying when one's action and doing come out of one's deepest place, it's not the same kind of doing as before. A pretty simple way to say it. And that it's actually deeply precious, and probably when we're there, it's almost like can sometimes be a sense of the sacred, something very special there. And so let me finish there, and thank you for your kind attention. And I was exploring with doing and not doing in the talk. You may have had a sense, and maybe you were doing that in the listening. So why don't we take a moment now just to pause, sit quietly and see what may have resonated with you, or what was helpful or important, or any questions you might have. Take a minute or two just of silence right now. Thank you. So please, anyone want to share something, ask a question? Yeah, if you want to